I am 52 years old, and I thought I understood the landscape of my own life. I believed it was a map I had drawn myself, alongside my husband, David. We had marked the treacherous mountains of our early, penniless years. We had charted the long, winding rivers of effort that led to the calm, blue ocean of our success. Every line, every contour felt earned. It felt real. It felt like ours. But at my son's wedding, standing in a room shimmering with fairy lights and champagne bubbles, a single whisper from a near stranger took that map, tore it into confetti, and threw it in my face. My son, Liam, was dancing with his new wife, Amelia. They were beautiful. Liam, so tall and kind, just like his father. Amelia, radiant and hopeful, her eyes sparkling with a future I had helped build for them. I felt a swell of pride so immense, it was almost painful. This was the culmination of everything: the late nights, the sacrifices, the unwavering belief that we were creating something that would last for generations. I smoothed down my dress, a deep emerald silk that had cost a small fortune, and felt the familiar weight of David's hand on the small of my back. He leaned in and murmured in my ear, "You see that? That's what it was all for." I squeezed his hand, my heart too full for words. That's when Chloe, Amelia's older sister and maid of honor, sidled up to me. She held a glass of champagne, but her eyes were cold and sober. She was a woman who seemed perpetually unimpressed, as if the world was a constant, low-grade disappointment to her. I had barely spoken to her throughout the whirlwind of wedding planning, but I had felt her assessing gaze on me more than once. "It's a beautiful wedding," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Amelia is a lucky girl. She certainly married well." I smiled, a polite mother of the groom smile. "Liam is the lucky one," I replied. "Amelia is a wonderful young woman." Chloe took a small sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving mine. There was a predatory stillness about her. "Oh, I'm sure," she said, the words dripping with an insinuation I couldn't quite place. "It's just, you have to be so careful these days. People can be so deceptive." I felt a prickle of annoyance. Was she implying my son had somehow deceived her sister? "Liam is an open book," I said, my tone a little cooler than before. "He adores Amelia." She let out a short, sharp laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place. "I'm not talking about Liam." My smile faltered. I glanced at David, but he was engaged in a conversation with one of his business partners, his back slightly turned to us. I looked back at Chloe, confused. "I'm sorry?" She leaned closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. Her voice dropped to a whisper that felt like a shard of ice against my ear. "She's only after the money." For a moment, I was utterly bewildered. Who was she talking about? Another guest? It made no sense. I must have misheard her over the music. "Who is?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Chloe's lips curved into a triumphant, ugly little smile. It was the smile of someone who had just played a winning card. "You," she whispered, "you're only after the money. You have been from the very beginning." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, nonsensical and absurd. Me? After David's money? David didn't have money when I met him. We had nothing. We had less than nothing. We had student loans and a tiny, drafty apartment with a mattress on the floor. We built our life from sawdust and dreams. The accusation was so ludicrous, so completely untethered from reality, that my first instinct was to laugh, but the laugh died in my throat. Because as I turned to David, ready to share this insane joke with him, ready for him to swoop in and defend my honor against this venomous woman, I saw his face, and it stopped my heart cold. He had overheard her. His conversation had faltered, his head slightly cocked, and his face, normally so ruddy and full of life, was the color of ash. His eyes were wide, fixed on Chloe, but not with anger, not with indignation. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated terror, the kind of fear you see in a trapped animal. His hand, which had been resting on my back, was suddenly gone. He had taken a small, unconscious step away from me. In that single, silent moment, The floor of my carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it vanished. The music, the laughter, the shimmering lights, it all faded into a distant, mocking hum. There was only Chloe's smug, triumphant face and my husband's terrifying, ghostly pallor. She had said I was after his money. A lie. A laughable, ridiculous lie. But my husband, the man who knew the truth better than anyone, looked like he had just seen a ghost. Or worse, like he had just been exposed as one. The question hammered in my brain, drowning out everything else. What did she know? And why, in God's name, was my husband so afraid of it? The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I moved through the crowd, smiling, accepting congratulations, my body performing the role of the happy mother of the groom while my mind was screaming. Every time I glanced at David, he was watching me with a hunted expression. He tried to act normal. He put his arm around me for a photo, his touch feeling alien and cold. He raised his glass for a toast, his voice sounding thin and reedy. But the fear never left his eyes. It was a dark stain that had seeped into the fabric of our celebration. Chloe, for her part, seemed immensely pleased with herself. She watched us from across the room, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had planted a seed of poison, and now she was sitting back to watch it grow. I felt a wave of nausea. This was my son's wedding day, a day I had dreamed of for years, and she had deliberately, maliciously ruined it. Not just for me, but for David too. The question was why? What had we ever done to her? Later that night, as we were saying our goodbyes to Liam and Amelia, who were leaving for their honeymoon, I held my son tight. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Thanks for everything. It was the perfect day." The perfect day. The words were a bitter irony. I looked over his shoulder at Amelia, who was hugging David. She looked happy, blissfully unaware of the drama her sister had unleashed. I managed a weak smile for her. "Take care of each other," I said. As they drove away in a car decorated with tin cans and shaving cream, a profound sadness settled over me. This should have been a moment of pure joy. Instead, it felt like an ending. The car ride home with David was suffocatingly silent. The air was thick with unspoken words. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, my mind replaying that moment with Chloe over and over. Her whisper, David's face. It was a loop of confusion and dread. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I didn't know where to begin. How do you ask your husband of 30 years if your entire life is a lie? When we got home, the house felt cavernously empty. The silence was louder here, bouncing off the walls of the life we had built. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. David followed me in, loosening his tie. He wouldn't look at me. "I'm going to head up to bed," he said, his voice strained. "It's been a long day." "David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He stopped, his back still to me. "We need to talk." He sighed, a long, weary sound. He finally turned to face me, and the fear was still there, lurking behind a flimsy mask of exhaustion. "Can it wait until tomorrow, Sarah?" "I'm exhausted." "No," I said. "It can't wait." "What happened tonight with Chloe?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. "It was nothing. She's a nasty piece of work. She was probably just drunk and trying to stir up trouble." "She wasn't drunk, David. And you didn't look like you thought it was nothing. You looked terrified." He flinched at the word. "Don't be dramatic." "I was just shocked that someone would say something so vile at our son's wedding. It was inappropriate. That's all." His denial was so weak, so transparent, it was almost insulting. He was treating me like a fool. "She said I was after your money," I pressed on, my voice gaining an edge of anger. "She said I had been from the beginning." "Why would she say that? And why did it scare you so much?" "It didn't scare me," he snapped, his voice rising. "It angered me. How dare she insult you like that? Insult us? After everything we've built together? He was trying to turn it around, to make us a team against her, but his performance was unconvincing. The fear in his eyes had been real. The way he had stepped away from me had been real. It didn't look like anger, David. It looked like you'd been caught. The accusation hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. His face hardened. Caught doing what? Living a good life with my wife? Building a successful company? Providing for my family? Is that a crime now? Stop it, I said, my voice trembling now. Just stop it. Don't lie to me. Not after 30 years. What did she mean by your family's money? Your parents were teachers. My parents were shopkeepers. We didn't have family money. We had nothing, remember? I watched his face, searching for any flicker of the man I had married, the young man who had shared a can of soup with me because it was all we could afford. But the man standing in front of me was a stranger. His jaw was tight. His eyes were guarded. She's a liar, he said, his voice flat and cold. She made it up. Now, I'm going to bed. I'm not discussing this ridiculous fantasy any further. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the echo of his lie. I stood there for a long time, the cold glass of water in my hand, my heart feeling like a block of ice in my chest. He had never spoken to me like that before. He had never been so dismissive, so cold. He was hiding something big. Chloe's words were a key, and they had just unlocked a door I never even knew existed. And behind that door, my husband was hiding a secret that was so terrible, he was willing to treat me like an enemy to protect it. The next few days were a master class in avoidance. David left for work early and came home late. When he was home, he was glued to his phone or the television, creating a wall of electronic noise to keep me out. Any attempt I made to broach the subject was met with a curt dismissal or a sudden, urgent need to be in another room. The tension in the house was a physical presence. It was in the way we moved around each other, the way our utensils clinked too loudly in the silence at the dinner table, the way the king-sized bed felt like a vast, frozen tundra between us. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I the crazy one? Had I imagined the terror on his face? Was he right? Was Chloe just a malicious gossip who had gotten under my skin? I tried to rationalize it. I tried to believe my husband, but I couldn't shake the image of his pale, stricken face. It was the face of a man whose carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The lie he was telling me was almost worse than the secret itself. He was denying my reality, trying to make me believe I had misinterpreted the whole thing. He was gaslighting me, and he had never done that before. Our marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty. At least, that's what I had always believed. Now, cracks were appearing in that foundation, and I was terrified of what I might find if I looked too closely. A week after the wedding, Liam and Amelia returned from their honeymoon, tanned and happy. They came over for dinner, and I put on a brave face, pretending everything was normal. David played his part too, laughing and asking about their trip, but I could see the strain around his eyes. He was performing, just as I was. Amelia seemed oblivious, chattering away about the beautiful beaches and the delicious food. But as the evening wore on, I noticed a subtle shift in her. She kept glancing at me, a worried frown creasing her brow. When the men went into the living room to watch a game, she helped me clear the plates in the kitchen. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" she asked quietly. I forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Why do you ask?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "It's just, you seem a little quiet tonight. And David, too. And, well, my sister Chloe said something." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Oh, what did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Amelia looked deeply uncomfortable. "She called me a few days ago. She was acting very strange. She said she was worried about me, about this family. She said there were secrets, and that I should be careful." I stopped what I was doing, my hands frozen in the soapy water. So Chloe wasn't done. She was still pushing, still trying to sow discord. "Chloe seems to enjoy drama," I said carefully. "I wouldn't pay her any mind." "I know," Amelia said quickly. "She can be difficult. Liam and I had a talk with her. We told her to stop making trouble, but she was so insistent. She said things about David's family having old money and that you knew about it all along. The accusation was a physical blow. It was one thing for Chloe to say it to me. It was another for her to be spreading this poison to my new daughter-in-law, trying to turn her against me. "Amelia," I said, turning to face her, my hands dripping with water. "My husband's parents were teachers. We started with nothing. We built our company from the ground up with a small loan and a lot of hard work. That is the truth." "Your sister is either mistaken or she is lying." She looked relieved. "That's what I told her. It didn't make any sense. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It's just, she got in my head." "Don't worry about it," I said, forcing another smile. "Let's not let her ruin our evening." But she had. The rest of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Chloe wasn't just making a random drunken comment. This was a campaign. She was deliberately trying to damage my reputation and my relationship with my family. But why? And what information was she basing it on? It had to be more than just a guess. She was too confident, too smug. She believed she was telling the truth, which meant that somewhere there was a source for her lie. That night, after Liam and Amelia had left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to David's steady breathing, and felt a chasm of distance between us. He was my husband, the man I had shared my life with. And yet, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. The need for answers was a gnawing hunger inside me. I couldn't live like this, in this house full of secrets and lies. Around 2 a.m, I slipped out of bed. I knew I couldn't get the truth from David, so I would have to find it myself. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt a pull towards his office, a room that had always been his private sanctuary. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. His office was neat and orderly, just like him. Bookshelves lined one wall. A large oak desk dominated the center of the room. I started there, carefully opening drawers, trying not to disturb anything. Financial statements, business contracts, old calendars. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I moved to the filing cabinets, my fingers skimming over the labels. Everything was meticulously organized by year. It felt hopeless. I was searching for a needle in a haystack, and I didn't even know what the needle looked like. I was about to give up when I remembered something. Years ago, David had mentioned storing some old personal papers in the back of his closet in our bedroom. Things from his parents, old college memorabilia. I'd never paid it much attention. On a whim, I crept back upstairs. David was still sound asleep. I quietly opened his closet, the scent of his cologne and starched shirts filling the air. In the very back, behind a row of winter coats, was a small, dusty footlocker. It was made of dark wood with brass fittings, and it had a sturdy lock on the front. I had never seen it before. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. The answers were in that box. The problem was the lock. I searched his closet, his bedside table, his dresser. No key. I went back down to his office, my search now more frantic. I rifled through his desk drawers again, this time more thoroughly. In the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked under a stack of old checkbooks, was a small, ornate brass key. It looked old. It matched the lock on the footlocker. My hands were trembling as I carried the key back upstairs. I knelt on the floor of the closet, the heavy coats muffling the sound. With a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. I lifted the heavy lid. The box was filled with papers, yellowed with age. On top was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Beneath them were old, brittle bank statements and a thick, official-looking document bound in a blue cover. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked up the bound document. The title was printed in elegant script on the cover, "The Henderson Family Trust." Henderson. That was David's last name. I opened it, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. It was a trust agreement established by David's paternal grandfather, a man who had died long before I met David. A man David had always described as a simple farmer. I flipped through the pages until I got to the schedule of assets. My vision swam. The numbers were staggering. It was a fortune. Stocks, bonds, real estate. A vast portfolio of wealth that had been set aside for one person, his grandson, David Henderson. My eyes scanned the terms of the trust. The money was to be managed by a law firm until David reached the age of 25, or until the day of his marriage, whichever came first. There was a specific clause, underlined in the document. The funds were to be released to him upon his marriage to a suitable partner, as determined by the trustees, who were his parents. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was 24 when I married David. He was 25. We had married just 2 months after his 25th birthday. The timing was perfect. I dropped the document and picked up the bank statements. They were from a private bank I had never heard of. They showed the trust's value growing year after year. And then there was a statement dated 3 weeks after our wedding day. It showed a massive withdrawal, a wire transfer. The recipient was a newly opened business account. The name of the account was DNS Enterprises, David and Sarah Enterprises, our company. The seed money, the money David had told me was a small inheritance from a great aunt, combined with every penny he had saved from his college jobs. It had been a lie, all of it. It wasn't a small inheritance. It was a fortune. It wasn't his savings. It was trust fund money. We hadn't struggled together. We hadn't built our company from scratch. He had used his secret inheritance to fund our life, and he had let me believe, for 30 years, that I had been his equal partner in its creation. I sank back on my heels. The cold reality of it washing over me. Chloe hadn't been lying. She had been telling the truth. I was the one who had been living in a fantasy. My entire adult life, the very narrative I had built my identity around, was a complete and utter fraud. And the man sleeping peacefully in our bed, the man I had loved and trusted for 3 decades, was the architect of it all. I wasn't his partner. I was just the suitable girl he had needed to unlock his inheritance. I sat there on the floor of the closet for what felt like hours. The damning evidence spread out around me. The silence of the house was a roaring in my ears. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a hammer blow, counting down the seconds of my old life as it bled out on the floor. My first emotion wasn't just anger. It was a profound, hollow sense of humiliation. I thought back to all the years I had felt so proud of our story. I had told it to everyone, to our friends, to our son. The story of the 2 college kids with nothing but love and ambition who had worked their fingers to the bone to build an empire. I had romanticized our early struggles, the cheap meals, the secondhand furniture. I saw them as badges of honor, proof of our resilience and our partnership. Now I saw them for what they were, a charade, a performance for my benefit. While I was carefully budgeting our grocery money, David had a fortune waiting for him. While I was taking on extra shifts at my waitressing job to help make ends meet, he knew there was a safety net woven from gold threads that I couldn't see. He had watched me worry. He had let me sacrifice. And he had said nothing. The betrayal was so deep, so fundamental, it felt like it was rewriting my own history. Every memory was now tainted. Our first anniversary, celebrated with a single, shared slice of cheesecake because it was all we could afford. Was that a lie? The time he held me when I cried because a major client pulled out and I thought we were going to lose everything? Was he secretly laughing inside, knowing we had millions in reserve? I carefully placed the documents back in the box, closed the lid, and locked it. I put the key back in his desk drawer, exactly where I had found it. I needed to think. Confronting him now in the middle of the night would just lead to a screaming match. He would deny it, he would twist it, he would try to manage the situation. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to be smarter. I needed to understand the whole truth before I faced him. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. It was the hardest performance of my life. I made coffee. I asked him about his day. I smiled as he left for work. But inside, I was a coiled spring of rage and grief. As soon as he was gone, I took the trust document out of the box again and took a picture of the relevant pages with my phone. I paid special attention to the name of the law firm that managed the trust: Dalton, Finch, and Associates. It was located in Oak Creek, David's hometown, a sleepy little place 3 hours away. I knew I couldn't just call them and ask about my husband's secret trust fund. I needed a plan. I decided to start with what I could control. I went to our bank, the one we had used for decades, and asked for a meeting with our personal banker, a kind woman named Martha, whom I had known for years. "Martha," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm doing some financial planning, and I need to get a clear picture of all our assets. I need a full accounting of every account David and I hold, jointly and individually." She smiled warmly. "Of course, Sarah, it's always wise to have a clear picture. Let me pull everything up for you." As she typed away at her computer, I held my breath. I knew about our joint accounts, our investment portfolios, our retirement funds. What I didn't know was if he had kept anything else hidden. After a few minutes, she turned the screen towards me. It showed everything I already knew. There were no secret accounts, no hidden stashes of money under his name at this bank. Everything was transparent. For a fleeting second, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe he had folded all the money into our shared life. Maybe he had lied about the source, but not about the partnership. But the relief was short-lived. The lie about the source was the original sin. It was the foundation of everything. And the trust itself was managed by a different entity entirely. My next step was more difficult. I needed to know more about that law firm. I looked them up online. Dalton, Finch, and Associates was an old, established firm specializing in estate planning and wealth management for the town's founding families. It reeked of old money and discretion. I thought about what to do. I couldn't just march in there. I needed a plausible reason to be asking questions. I remembered the old, chatty paralegal my friend had once told me about, the kind who had been there forever and knew all the town's secrets. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I came up with a story. I would pretend to be a freelance genealogist, hired by a distant Henderson relative to build a family tree. It was flimsy, but it might be enough to get my foot in the door. The following day, I told David I was going to visit an old college friend for a couple of days. He seemed relieved to have me out of the house. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was a necessary evil. I drove the 3 hours to Oak Creek, a town I had only visited a handful of times to see David's parents when they were alive. It was a charming place, with a historic town square and grand old Victorian houses. It was a town that looked like it was good at keeping secrets. I found the law firm in a stately brick building just off the main square. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The receptionist was a young woman who looked bored. "Hello," I said, putting on my most professional voice. I was hoping to speak with someone who has been with the firm for a long time. I'm a genealogist working on the Henderson family history, and I have a few questions about some old family documents. She looked skeptical. "We have very strict client confidentiality rules." "Of course," I said smoothly. "I'm not looking for any financial information, just historical context. For example, I'm trying to confirm the name of the patriarch who established a family trust decades ago. Public records are a bit unclear." She seemed to consider this. "Let me see if Mrs. Gable is available. She's been our head paralegal for over 40 years. If anyone knows, she does." A few minutes later, a woman with a cloud of white hair and bright, intelligent eyes emerged from an office. This was Mrs. Gable. She was exactly the type of person I had hoped to find. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice warm. "Brenda tells me you're digging into the Henderson family. A fascinating bunch, to be sure." I explained my fabricated story, and she listened patiently, nodding along. "Ah, yes, the Henderson Trust," she said, her eyes twinkling with memory. "That was established by the old man himself, William Henderson, David's grandfather. He was a shrewd man, didn't trust his own son as far as he could throw him. That's why he set it up so David was the sole beneficiary." My heart started to beat faster. "That's very helpful," I said. The family lore is so muddled. Some say the family was quite wealthy, others say they were simple farmers. Mrs. Gable let out a hearty laugh. Oh, they were wealthy, all right. At least William was. He made a fortune in timber. But his son, David's father, had a taste for the high life and not much of a head for business. William was terrified he'd squander the entire family legacy. The trust was his way of protecting it for the next generation. She leaned in conspiratorially. He was very specific about the terms. David couldn't touch a penny of the principal until he was married. And not just to anyone. William put a clause in there, a suitability clause. He wanted David to marry a sensible, stable girl from a good family, someone who wouldn't help him spend it all on fast cars and nonsense. There it was again. That word. Suitable. It felt like a brand on my forehead. The trustees had to approve of the match, Mrs. Gable continued, clearly enjoying her trip down memory lane. In this case, it was David's own parents. I remember when he brought you to meet them. They were so relieved. You were just what the old man would have wanted. A lovely, down-to-earth girl. Not like some of the others he had been running around with before you. The blood drained from my face. Others? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, you know how boys are, she said with a wave of her hand. There was one in particular, a wild child from a family with a bad reputation. His parents were terrified he was going to marry her and lose everything, but then he met you, and everything settled down. It was a real blessing for them. I felt sick. I was the safe choice. The sensible, down-to-earth girl who would guarantee the money flowed. My entire identity, the person I thought I was, had been reduced to a single, transactional word. Suitable. I thanked Mrs. Gable for her time, my mind reeling. As I walked out of the law firm and into the bright sunshine of the town square, the charming facade of Oak Creek seemed to melt away, revealing something ugly and rotten underneath. I'd come here for answers, and I'd found them. But the truth was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the deception. I hadn't been chosen. I had been vetted. My marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a prerequisite. I drove home in a daze, the 3-hour journey feeling like an eternity. The carefully constructed narrative of my life was in ruins, and I didn't know how to begin to pick up the pieces. All I knew was that I could never look at my husband the same way again. The man I had married didn't exist. He was a character, a role he had played for 30 years, and I had been his unsuspecting audience. When I got home, David was already there. He was in the kitchen, making dinner. The sight of him, so domestic and normal, was jarring. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger in my own house. Hey, he said, smiling. You're back early. How was your trip? Fine, I said, my voice flat. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. I walked past him and went upstairs. I needed to be alone. I needed to breathe. He followed me into the bedroom. Sarah, what's wrong? You seem upset. I turned to face him, the anger I had been suppressing all day finally bubbling to the surface. Upset? I said, my voice shaking with rage. Oh, I'm more than upset, David. I'm enlightened. He looked confused, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes again. He knew something was wrong. What are you talking about? I went to Oak Creek, I said, watching his face. The color drained from it, just as it had at the wedding. He knew. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Why would you go there? He asked, his voice strained. I had a very interesting chat with a woman named Mrs. Gable at Dalton, Finch, and Associates, I said, letting the names hang in the air between us. She told me all about the Henderson Family Trust. She told me all about your grandfather, the timber baron, and she told me all about the suitability clause. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He looked like a fish, gasping for air. The mask was gone. All that was left was the raw, naked fear. 30 years, David, I said, my voice cracking. For 30 years, you let me believe we were in this together, that we built this from nothing. But it was all a lie. You had a fortune waiting for you, and all you needed was a suitable wife to unlock it. Was that me, David? Was I just the key? He finally found his voice, a desperate, pleading whisper. No, Sarah, it wasn't like that. I loved you. I still love you. Love? I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Don't you dare talk to me about love. Love is built on trust, and you have been lying to me since the day we met. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of pride I felt in what we accomplished, it was all based on a lie. You didn't just lie to me, David. You stole my life. You stole my story. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot tears of anger and betrayal. I want to know everything, I said, my voice low and dangerous. And this time, I want the truth. The whole truth. No more lies. He sank down onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He looked like a broken man. But I felt no pity for him. Not yet. All I felt was a cold, hard resolve. I had been living in his shadow, in his story, for my entire adult life. Now it was time to find out who I was without him. And it was time for him to face the consequences of his 30-year deception. The confession, when it came, was a pathetic, rambling mess of excuses and self-pity. He talked about the immense pressure from his parents, the fear of his father's financial recklessness, the terror of losing the only security his family had left. He painted a picture of himself as a young man trapped by circumstance, forced into a deception he never wanted. My father had already lost so much, he said, his voice muffled by his hands. The trust was all that was left. My grandfather made it ironclad. My parents were terrified I'd make the same mistakes he did. They were obsessed with me finding the right kind of person. The suitable kind of person, I corrected him, my voice devoid of emotion. I sat in the armchair across from him, a silent, stony judge. Yes, he admitted, finally looking at me, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. They were so worried about the girl I was seeing before you, Jessica. Her family was a mess. They thought she would be a disaster. When I met you, they were overjoyed. You were everything they wanted for me. You were smart, you were steady, you came from a good, solid family. I was safe, I said. I was the sensible choice who wouldn't rock the boat and would allow you to collect your inheritance. No, he insisted, standing up and pacing the room. It wasn't just that. I fell in love with you, Sarah. The moment I met you, you were different from anyone I'd ever known. You were real. You had integrity. The irony of him talking about my integrity was so thick I could have choked on it. And you decided to honor my integrity by building our entire relationship on a monumental lie? I was going to tell you, he said, the classic coward's defense. I swear I was. I planned to tell you before we got married. But my parents, they convinced me not to. They said you were proud. They said you might leave me if you knew the truth. They said you would feel like you hadn't earned it. They said it would be better to just let it be our secret, the foundation we built on. Our secret? I scoffed. No, David, it was your secret. I wasn't a part of it. I was the victim of it. I thought about his parents, who had always been so kind and welcoming to me. I had loved them. Now I realized that their warmth had been a performance too. They weren't welcoming a new daughter. They were securing an asset. They had seen me not as a person but as a solution to their financial problems. The depth of the manipulation was staggering. It wasn't just David. It was his entire family. And the business? I asked, my voice cold. D&S Enterprises. David and Sarah. You put my initial on a company funded by money you lied to me about. How dare you? I wanted you to be a part of it, he cried, his voice cracking. I wanted it to be ours. I thought if we built it together, it wouldn't matter where the money came from. It would become our story. And it did. We worked hard, Sarah. The money was just the start. Your ideas, your drive. You were the reason we succeeded. He was trying to placate me, to give me credit for my own life. But his words were hollow. It did matter where the money came from. It mattered because he had denied me the truth, and in doing so, he had denied me the agency to make my own choices. I had married him under false pretenses. I had entered into a partnership that was never equal. And what about Chloe? I asked, the final piece of the puzzle. How did she know? David looked away, ashamed. Her father was an accountant, a junior partner in a firm in Oak Creek that did some work for my family's estate years ago. He was a notorious gossip. He must have seen the trust documents. Chloe must have heard him talking about it and filed it away. She's a vicious, opportunistic person. She saw a chance to cause trouble, and she took it. It all clicked into place. Chloe's smug confidence, her targeted attack. She had been holding on to this information, a trump card to be played when it would cause the most damage. She had likely hoped to drive a wedge between us, perhaps to make Amelia's position in the family more secure, or even to blackmail us for money. Her motives were cruel, but her information had been accurate. In a twisted way, she had given me the gift of the truth. I want you to leave, I said, the words coming out calm and clear. The storm of emotion inside me had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. What? Sarah, no, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. Don't throw away 30 years. You threw it away, David, I said, standing up. You threw it away the day you decided to lie to me. And you've been throwing it away every day since. I don't know the man standing in front of me. And I don't think I want to. I need space. I need to think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. A life that is based on truth. Where will I go? He asked, his voice small and lost. I don't care, I said, the words like chips of ice. Go to a hotel, go to your office, just get out of my house. He looked around the room at the furniture we had picked out together, the photos of our family on the walls. He looked at me, his eyes begging for a reprieve. But he saw none. He saw that the woman he had married, the suitable and sensible woman, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman whose world had been shattered and who was no longer willing to play by his rules. He packed a bag in silence, his movements slow and defeated. I watched him, feeling nothing but a vast, empty numbness. As he stood at the door, he turned to me one last time. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't mean much right now, but I am. I've loved you for 30 years. Goodbye, David, I said, and closed the door behind him. The silence that followed was different from the tense silence of the past week. It was a clean, empty silence. It was the sound of a new beginning. I was alone, in a house paid for by a lie, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days that followed were a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I mourned the marriage I thought I had, the man I thought I knew. I walked through the rooms of my house, touching objects, reevaluating memories. The painting we bought on our trip to Italy, was that trip a celebration of our love or a distraction funded by his guilt? The antique desk in the study, a gift for our 20th anniversary, was it a symbol of our shared success or a gilded cage? But alongside the grief, there was a growing sense of empowerment. The truth, as painful as it was, had set me free. I was no longer an unwitting character in David's story. I could write my own. I called my sister, a pragmatic lawyer who lived 2 states away, and told her everything. She listened in stunned silence, punctuated by furious outbursts on my behalf. That absolute bastard, she fumed. He didn't just lie, Sarah. That's fraud. He induced you into marriage under false pretenses. You have grounds for an annulment, let alone a divorce. I don't know what I want yet, I confessed. Right now, I just need to process it all. You process, she said, her voice firm. And while you're processing, you gather information. Get a forensic accountant, find out exactly where every penny of that trust money went. Knowledge is power, Sarah. Don't let him control the narrative anymore. Her advice was sound. I hired a highly recommended forensic accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans. I gave her the copies of the trust documents and the old bank statements I had found. I wanted a complete and total picture of our finances from day one. I wanted to see the lie in black and white. While Ms. Evans began her work, I had to face another challenge, telling our son. Liam called me every day, worried because he couldn't reach his father and David wasn't at the office. I'd been putting him off with vague excuses, but I couldn't do it anymore. He deserved the truth. I invited him over for lunch. He walked in, his face etched with concern. Mom. What is going on? Dad's not answering his phone. Is he okay? Are you okay? I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many family meals, and I told him everything. I started from the beginning, from Chloe's whisper at the wedding, to the locked box in the closet, to the devastating truth of the Henderson Trust. I laid it all out, sparing no detail. He listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a deep, simmering anger. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at his hands on the table. So, our whole life, he began, his voice rough with emotion. Everything we had, it was all because of some secret trust fund. The money gave us the start, Liam, I said gently. But we did work hard. Your father and I both worked very hard to build the company into what it is today. The success is real, but the foundation it was built on was a lie. He lied to you, he said, his voice low and tight, for your entire marriage. He let you believe you were struggling together when he was a millionaire. Yes, I said simply. He stood up and began to pace the kitchen, just as his father had. But his anger was different. It wasn't the panicked anger of a man caught in a lie. It was the righteous anger of a son whose mother had been betrayed. How could he? He raged. How could he do that to you? To us? He made you the bad guy in his story. He let Chloe accuse you of being a gold digger, knowing that you were the one who had been deceived. Chloe didn't know the whole story, I said. She just knew about the money. She used it to hurt us. And it worked, he said bitterly. She blew it all up. Mom, I'm so sorry. For what she did, and for what he did. I can't even look at him right now. This is between your father and me, Liam, I told him. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose sides. There are no sides, he said fiercely. There's right and there's wrong. And what he did was wrong. Period. His unwavering support was a balm to my wounded soul. I had worried that he would be angry, that he would resent the upheaval in our family. But he saw the betrayal for what it was. He saw me. A few days later, I got a call from Amelia. She sounded distraught. Sarah, Liam told me everything. I have no words. I am so sorry. For what my sister did, and for what David did to you. It's unforgivable. It's not your fault. Amelia, I said, my voice softer than I expected. But it is, she cried. It's my family's fault. Chloe, she's always been jealous of me. When I met Liam and I saw how wonderful your family was, how successful you were, I think it drove her crazy. She must have been sitting on that information, that horrible gossip from our father, just waiting for a chance to use it, to prove that you weren't as perfect as you seemed. It's monstrous. What she did was cruel, I agreed. But what David did was a betrayal of a different magnitude. I know, she whispered. Liam is devastated. He won't even speak to his father. And he told Chloe that if she ever speaks to you or him again, he'll cut her out of his life for good. They had a terrible fight. She's not talking to either of us now. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction that Chloe's scheme had backfired so spectacularly. She had intended to isolate me, to paint me as a villain. Instead, she had isolated herself and exposed her own toxic nature. She had handed me the truth, but in doing so, she had lost her sister. The preliminary report from Ms. Evans arrived a week later. It was a thick binder filled with spreadsheets and summaries. I sat down with a pot of coffee and began to read. It was even worse than I had imagined. The trust fund hadn't just been the seed money. Over the years, whenever the business had faced a downturn or needed a capital infusion for a new project, David had quietly drawn from the trust's interest income. He had presented these moments to me as times when he had secured a high-risk loan or convinced a skeptical investor to come on board. I had admired his business acumen, his nerves of steel. In reality, he had just been transferring money from one of his pockets to another. He had created an elaborate fiction of risk and reward, of struggle and triumph, all to maintain the illusion of our shared journey. The report detailed at least a dozen instances where the company would have faced serious financial trouble or even bankruptcy if not for the secret safety net of the trust. He hadn't just lied about the beginning, he had been actively lying year after year about the very nature of our success. The most damning part of the report was the analysis of our personal spending. The house, the cars, the lavish vacations, Liam's private school and university education. It was all inextricably linked to the trust. My entire life, the comfortable, privileged life I'd felt I'd earned through hard work, was a product of this deception. Armed with this information, I felt a new sense of resolve. The numbness was replaced by a cold, clear anger. I was not going to be a victim. I was not going to crumble. I was going to take control. I called David and told him we needed to meet. I suggested a neutral location, a conference room at my lawyer's office. I didn't want him in my house again. He agreed immediately, his voice sounding small and desperate over the phone. When I saw him walk into the conference room, I was shocked. In the 2 weeks since I had kicked him out, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His face was gaunt, his eyes were haunted, and his expensive suit hung on him as if he had lost a significant amount of weight. He looked like a man who had been stripped of everything. I felt a flicker of pity, but I quickly extinguished it. He had done this to himself. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank you for seeing me." I didn't respond. I simply slid a copy of Ms. Evans's report across the polished mahogany table towards him. "I think you should look at this," I said. He opened the binder, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. I watched his face as he saw his 30-year lie laid bare in charts and numbers. He saw the secret withdrawals, the fabricated loans, the entire financial history of our life together exposed. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy yellow. He closed the binder, unable to look at it any longer. I can explain," he stammered. "No," I said, my voice calm and steady. "There is nothing left to explain. There are only consequences. I have filed for divorce, David." He flinched, as if I had struck him. "Sarah, please," he begged. "Don't do this. We can get through this. I'll do anything. I'll give you everything." "You see, that's the problem, David," I said, leaning forward. "You still think it's yours to give. You still don't get it. For 30 years, you treated me like a junior partner in my own life. You made decisions without my knowledge. You exposed us to risks I was unaware of, and you denied me the dignity of being your true equal. You talk about giving me everything, but half of a lie is still a lie." I stood up, my bag in my hand. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. I want the house. It's the only thing that feels even remotely real to me right now. I want a settlement that reflects not just my contribution to the business, but compensation for 3 decades of fraud." "Whatever you want," he whispered, his eyes filled with tears. "Just don't hate me." I looked at him, the man who was now a complete stranger to me. "I don't hate you, David," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. "I don't feel anything for you at all. And that, I think, is far worse." I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving him alone with the evidence of his betrayal. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me with a quiet, final click. The divorce was swift and uncontested. David, true to his word, didn't fight me on anything. He seemed to be a man hollowed out by guilt and shame. He signed the papers, gave me the house, and agreed to a financial settlement that was more than generous. It was penance. He was trying to buy forgiveness, but it was a currency I was no longer dealing in. I sold the large, empty house that felt more like a museum of a fake life than a home. I bought a smaller place for myself, a beautiful townhouse with a garden, in a neighborhood I'd always loved. It was the first major purchase I'd ever made that was entirely my own. The feeling of signing those papers, of knowing that this space belonged to me and me alone was intoxicating. I started my own consulting business. I had decades of experience in marketing and business development, skills that I had honed at DNS Enterprises. I'd always believed I was good at my job, but there had been a lingering insecurity, a quiet voice that wondered if our success was more due to David's financial wizardry than my creative talents. Now I knew the truth. His wizardry was just a secret bank account. My talent, however, was real. My business thrived. I was good at what I did, and clients responded to my passion and my integrity. I was building something from the ground up, for real this time. There were no secret safety nets, no hidden advantages. Every success was mine. Every failure was a lesson I learned and owned. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly proud of myself. Liam and Amelia were my rocks. They checked in on me constantly, bringing me meals, helping me unpack in my new house, and just sitting with me in comfortable silence when I needed it. Our relationship deepened, forged in the fires of this crisis. They were building their own life together, on a foundation of honesty and communication, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. They remained estranged from Chloe. Amelia had tried to reach out to her sister, but Chloe was unrepentant, blaming me for tearing the family apart and refusing to apologize for her actions. Amelia finally had to accept that the sister she loved was gone, replaced by a bitter, envious woman she no longer recognized. It was a source of great sadness for her, but she knew she had to protect her own new family from that toxicity. I saw David only once after the divorce was finalized. I was at a cafe, meeting a client, and he was at a table across the room, alone. He looked older, smaller. He saw me, and for a moment, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of hope in his expression, a desperate plea. I gave him a small, polite nod, a nod you would give a stranger, and then I turned back to my client. I saw him from the corner of my eye as he paid his bill and left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A few months later, Liam told me that David had sold DNS Enterprises. He said he couldn't stand to walk into the office every day, to be surrounded by the monument to his lies. He was living a quiet, solitary life in a condo downtown. He had started seeing a therapist, trying to unravel the lifetime of fear and insecurity that had led him to make the choices he did. I was glad to hear it for Liam's sake. I hoped that David could find some semblance of peace, that he could learn to live with the man he was, not the man he had pretended to be. But his journey was his own. It had nothing to do with me anymore. One evening, I was sitting in my garden, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone rang. It was Liam. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "Just wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm doing wonderfully, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. "Good," he said. "Amelia and I have some news. We wanted you to be the first to know." I heard Amelia's excited whisper in the background. "We're pregnant," he said, his voice filled with a joy that was so pure it brought tears to my eyes. "You're going to be a grandma," I cried, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. A new generation, a new beginning, a chance to build a family legacy based on love and truth. After I hung up, I sat in the twilight, the joy bubbling up inside me. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the woman whose world had been shattered by a single, cruel whisper. She had felt so lost, so broken. But she had found her way. She had taken the rubble of her old life and used it to build a new foundation, one that was stronger and more authentic than anything she had ever known. The story of my life wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't a fairy tale of shared struggle and triumph. It was a story of deception and betrayal. But it was also a story of resilience, of strength, and of rebirth. David had tried to write my story for me, to cast me in a role of his choosing. But in the end, I had taken back the pen. The final chapters were mine, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would be the best ones yet. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself. And it was the most valuable thing I had ever owned.